This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
We had that sit-down talk where the filmmaker tells you, sometimes before he shows you his film, what he feels the film is about and what elements are in it. And I'd been through a lot of those talks, you know, the philosophy and the depth of it and the dream of the filmmaker. And then in many cases they show you the picture and you're sitting there going, where is that movie? So I sat down, and I must say I wasn't cynical, but I always was sort of, when, you know, Jim had a lot of big feelings about the film and passion for it, so when he spoke about it, it was very impressive, and I'm sort of, part of my brain's going, well, let's see, you know, and I'm watching the film, and, you know, 10 minutes in, I'm going, it's here.
The Terminator roared onto screens in 1984, winning critical acclaim, box office hit status, and launching the career of one of the most successful filmmakers of our time. However, Terminator's success was far from guaranteed. In the run-up to its release, the film seemed like any other B-movie. Tales of time-traveling killer robots was the stuff of Roger Corman and canon film schlock. So the Terminator seemed destined for cult status only, a gore-filled action flick which would doom its ambitious director to the straight-to-video world forever. Yet the Terminator defied all expectations to not only become a hit, but a cultural icon which launched a sprawling mythos. So how was this achieved? How did James Cameron and the team of artists, producers, and technicians turn a B-movie into a masterpiece? The simple answer is that The Terminator is, hot take, a good movie. This is a rather obvious explanation, but I want to go further than that. It's taken for granted these days that The Terminator is good, but I want to explore its strengths in more detail, and that exploration starts with James Cameron's creative philosophy. A common piece of advice given to low-budget indie filmmakers is to work with what you have. Look at the locations, props, and actors available, and create a film around those elements. Many great films have been made this way, but James Cameron does not operate under this maxim. After all, at the time Cameron wrote Terminator, he was living on a friend's couch and feeding himself using food coupons mailed to him by his mum. James Cameron does not care what resources he has available, he cares what he has in his head. Famously, his vision for the Terminator came to him in a fever dream during post-production of his disastrous directorial debut. The image of a robotic endoskeleton emerging from fire immediately stuck with Cameron, and he raced to commit it to canvas. But this image illustrates another key element to the success of Cameron's movies: simplicity with depth. James Cameron's movies are usually very simple in a structural sense. He doesn't do complicated non-linear narratives or loose, intimate character studies. He tells high-concept stories with universal themes, but what sets them apart is the richness of detail within them. Nowadays, he's become known for this with the Avatar movies, concocting a 1,700-page document just on the world building. He fleshed out this universe in such granular detail, he even came up with the exact type of bolts used in the construction of the ISV Venture Star. This comprehensive world building is also present in The Terminator. Another writer may have been content by simply labeling the villains of the story the Machines, or calling the main antagonist a Terminator and leaving it at that. But Cameron goes in depth, creating brand names and model numbers, and explaining intricate technical details about how the machines work. That extra effort goes a long way in not only creating a sense of verisimilitude, but also in forging iconography. It's worth restating just how inspired the design of the T-800 is. Logically, Skynet building a robot with a face resembling a human skull doesn't make much sense, but emotionally it's incredibly powerful. The machine's inseparability from humanity, the question of whether the rise of artificial intelligence will inevitably lead to our downfall, the machines thinking themselves superior to us despite being created by us, all these ideas are embodied in this one image. It's no wonder the T-800 has become the default symbol for scary AI, because the design is just that good at representing these ideas. This is why the old maxim of working with what you have is sometimes too limiting for genre filmmaking. True originality means giving audiences something they've never seen before, and that kind of thing isn't just lying around. More often than not, an original vision has to be created from scratch. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the only tool you'll need to create a beautiful looking website for your business, portfolio, or online store. I used it to create my production company's website, and I didn't know the first thing about coding. I just found a template that worked for me and customized it using simple drag and drop tools. And now the process is even easier thanks to design intelligence. By combining 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise and cutting-edge AI technology, you can have a brand new website up and running literally within minutes. Everything from finding a template to integrating SEO can be personally tailored to your needs. Jump over to Squarespace using the link below to start building your website and use the coupon code Coleman for 10% off your first purchase. The Terminator's visual presentation is uplifted considerably by its striking cinematography. James Cameron has spoken often about Ridley Scott's influence on his films, and Terminator adopts the music video aesthetic of the day. The daytime scenes are all shot with a low sun, producing strong directional light and a flattering warmth over many scenes. However, the night scenes are where the cinematography excels. Bright neons and thick haze evoke the aforementioned music video look, and the use of low contrast filters also produces a lot of halation around light sources. The overall effect turns 80s Los Angeles into something resembling the cyberpunk sprawl of Blade Runner. There's a heavy noir influence, with hard light through blinds casting hard shadows across many walls, and much of the action playing out in seedy back alleys. The filmmakers even coined the term tech noir to describe the style and genre they were going for. Overall, it's a very stylish and atmospheric looking film, far more visually sophisticated than the average B-movie the Terminator was assumed to be. The special and visual effects by Stan Winston and Fantasy II also far exceed the standards of this type of movie. Cameron's desire to show audiences something they had never seen before extended to the makeup. Achieving the look seen in Cameron's concept art was thought to be impossible, but Winston's makeup team brought the idea to life by building on top of the actor's face and then subtracting to give the illusion of mechanical parts inside the skull. More complex sequences required Winston's team to create full-scale animatronic replicas of Arnold Schwarzenegger. The makeup effects hold up extremely well even by today's standards. The exposed metal skull under the Terminator's face is completely convincing, even after knowing how it was done. The transition between the animatronics is only slightly jarring, but the skin is noticeably more rubbery and the movement is not as smooth. Yet this was state-of-the-art puppetry at the time, and the high standard is still clear. Fantasy II's work on the film isn't as consistent, but it's still incredibly impressive what they were able to achieve with such limited resources. Rather than expensive motion-controlled miniature techniques used in films like Star Wars, most of Terminator's miniature effects were created entirely in camera. Models were flown through sets on wires, and backgrounds were extended using rear projection. Forced perspective was also used to make the landscapes appear much larger than was possible to achieve inside Fantasy II's small studio. The opening shot is a little unconvincing as the hunter-killer swoops over the future battlefield. However, the tank HK looks terrific. The photography totally sells the scale and intercuts flawlessly with the full-scale live-action footage. Most impressive is the tanker explosion during the finale. Aside from one brief shot in which the tow cable is visible, the miniature appears entirely real. The rear projection shot of Linda Hamilton in the foreground as the truck blows up is also flawless. The stop-motion T-800 is a very dated effect, with Stan Winston's puppets holding up a lot better. However, there's an undeniable charm to stop-motion animation, and the puppets' jerky movements fit quite well with the character. In general, the effects work in The Terminator is leagues ahead of the kind seen in most other B-movies. While the work isn't at the same level as the likes of ILM across the board, it comes close. By the time the production came to the music, there was very little money left in the budget, so they couldn't afford an orchestra. Therefore, they enlisted Brad Fiedel to create the score, which he did inside his garage. Most of Terminator's score was recorded live, with Fidel playing over the simple rhythms and beats available on his instruments. Fidel's score is rightfully celebrated for its inventiveness and dark mood. Synthesizers were all the rage in the 70s and 80s, but there are few tracks in Terminator's score which feel firmly rooted in that time. The police station escape track is probably the only one. The rest of the tracks are more abstract and experimental sounding. The music for the title character is especially noteworthy. Most scenes with the Terminator are underpinned by this relentless pulsing sound, like a human heartbeat which has been mechanically warped. Other tracks sound like industrial percussion but slowed down and muffled to sound more foreboding. This music, in combination with the cinematography, is what builds the film's atmosphere. Easily the most iconic part of the Terminator score is the main theme. It's an amazingly versatile piece. It is melancholic, capturing the tragedy of the dark future Kyle comes from. Rather than emphasizing the horror elements, the theme better encapsulates the sense of loss. Yet there's also a quiet heroism to it. When played at a faster tempo with added percussion, the melancholy gives way to a sense of triumphing against the odds. And yet the theme is also perfect as a love theme. During the scene where Kyle confesses his love to Sarah, the usual synth sound switches to an acoustic piano. This simple change suddenly transforms all the tragedy and darkness of the theme into sweeping, heartfelt emotion. It's a very atypical theme for a sci-fi action flick, but its uniqueness is the reason for its iconic status. James Cameron is often accused of writing archetypal characters. I won't necessarily disagree, but again, we must bring up the idea of simplicity with depth. The characters in the Terminator slot neatly into their expected roles, but each one is given a memorable personality and voice, thanks to Cameron's writing, as well as his terrific casting instincts. No other actor could have played the Terminator but Arnold Schwarzenegger. His physical presence alone is enough to make you terrified. It's not just his immense size, but his body language, movement, and expression. It's not stiff or clunky, but smooth and efficient. He moves like a machine with no wasted energy. Even his unique speaking voice does him a lot of favors as the Terminator. Schwarzenegger's accent was still pretty thick in the 80s, but by flattening his tone, his word pronunciation gives the Terminator's voice an uncanny quality. His unique grasp of the English language is what makes lines like "I'll be back" so memorable. He has the presence of an unrelenting force which will stop at nothing to achieve its goal. On the other hand, Michael Biehn's Kyle Reese is the perfect counterbalance. Bienh has action hero chops of his own, but with far more grit and, most importantly, vulnerability. He comes across as an ordinary man swept up in greater events. Yet he also looks great in hard-boiled attire and brandishes a shotgun like a pro. He is harsh and at times scary, but he's also innocent in a way. He has led such a painful life that he moves through the world with a strange naivete. He doesn't think twice about telling 80s cops about killer robots from the future, and gets angry when they don't believe him. He never really had a proper childhood, and yet he never really grew up. Underneath his tough shell is a good man in desperate need of human connection. In a way, Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor is Kyle's mirror image. She's pitch perfect as the girl next door type, and looks spot on as the final girl in a slasher movie. Yet when Connor barks orders at Reese like a drill sergeant and delivers the final action hero one-liner, it seems so natural coming out of Linda Hamilton. It reveals the inner strength she had from the very beginning. It's just a shame we don't see more of it in the movie, as Connor, despite her importance, is a largely reactive character for most of the plot. Thankfully, her potential as an action heroine is fully capitalized on in the sequel. The supporting cast is also given distinct personalities and voices. You could almost call them quirks, but that's all we need to make these characters memorable. Ginger being attached to her Walkman even during sex, Vukovich constantly trying to tell crass anecdotes only to be cut off by Traxler each time, and the slimy psychologist Silberman becomes instantly hateable just by yawning over his first line. Even the tiniest single scene parts are memorable due to them being played by such recognizable character actors as Dick Miller and Bill Paxton. Also, did you forget that Sarah Connor has a pet iguana? Because I did. Through sheer personality, Cameron's archetypal characters are given depth. As David Mamet says, what matters most in character writing is what characters do and say, and in James Cameron's films they do and say plenty of interesting things. Usually when a filmmaker has worked as long as James Cameron, one can see their visual style and creative sensibilities develop over time. What makes the Terminator so impressive is that all of Cameron's strengths as a filmmaker are there right from the beginning. For all the inspiration Cameron took from filmmakers like Ridley Scott and his contemporaries, Cameron is also a student of classic Hollywood. This is evident in his blocking and camera movement. He eschews standard coverage in favor of more complex blocking. This is best shown in the police station scenes. Characters are often arranged in layers with lots of movement and depth. Take this scene for example. We start with Sarah Connor in the foreground, but the police officers moving in the background guide the camera in an arcing motion around Sarah, reframing to the door where the policemen enter. They then arrange themselves in this precise ensemble where everyone's faces can be clearly seen. In classical Hollywood, the rest of the scene could have played out in this one shot, but Cameron adds these close-ups so we can better read Sarah's emotions. This is just one example among many scenes which seem simple, but are actually creatively and precisely directed. Cameron has a great knack for giving his actors business. Actors rarely just stand or sit. Usually they have something else to do to give the scene life. People are always playing with objects. Coffee cups, cigarettes, clothing, weapons, you name it. As well as classic Hollywood blocking, Cameron follows the rules of Hitchcockian suspense. The viewer knows the Terminator is closing in on Sarah Connor, but she sits there oblivious, drawing out the tension. This great shot shows how close to death she is without even knowing it. And Cameron takes things a step further by using slow motion to heighten the suspense even more. James Cameron's directing style is the perfect melding between the old and the new. His style is not as showy as some of his contemporaries, but it is meticulously crafted. In fact, his directing style is so no-nonsense that it's almost invisible. Ironically, many scholars and fans who apply an auteurist lens to Cameron the director often end up only talking about Cameron the writer. With a movie like The Terminator, there's a definite risk of becoming bogged down in exposition, but this is easily the best aspect of the screenplay. Aside from the opening text, there isn't a single moment of true exposition until almost 40 minutes into the film. After so much intrigue, the audience may even welcome some exposition by this point, but the script keeps things engaging by delivering its biggest info dump in the middle of an action scene. More straightforward exposition is always justified either by character or circumstance. Sarah, like the audience, wants to know what's going on, so Kyle tells her. In another scene, Reese only reveals information to the police because he thinks it'll help. The visuals and dialogue throughout the film deliver a wealth of information without ever slowing down the pace. But aside from being a well-constructed script, The Terminator also has depth in its love story. Is it relatable and true to life? No. But is it well developed and integral to the story? Yes. Reese, who has known nothing but pain and death his entire life, is finally given the love he's always yearned for. Sarah, who thinks of herself as an insignificant nobody, meets someone who sees her as the most important person in all of creation.
John Connor gave me a picture of you once. You were young, like you are now. You seemed just a little sad. I used to always wonder what you were thinking at that moment.
In the few hours that we had together, we loved a lifetime's worth.
This was a love story which was literally destined. Some may call it cheesy, but I call it poetic and even beautiful. It gives the film an emotional resonance far beyond the simple thrills of the action or the intrigue of the world. The Terminator, unlike so many of its imitators, is about something deeper.
He said there's a storm coming in.
I know.
Orion Pictures knew they had a good film on their hands, but even they underestimated the Terminator's box office potential, quickly exhausting their marketing budget shortly into release. It was incredibly profitable in cinemas, but word of mouth made it a cultural phenomenon on TV and video. Nowadays, it seems the industry is in a holding pattern of IP exploitation, Terminator included. Yet the original Terminator shows what's always been true about the film business. The key to success is to let artists create. That's what happened in 1984. An artist had a vision and a story to tell, and despite working on cheap schlock, despite every major studio turning them down, despite all the production hurdles, that vision made it to the screen. It has endured for decades since, and it will for decades to come. The Terminator's originality and clarity of vision, paired with exemplary filmmaking craft, is what transformed it from a B-movie into a masterpiece. Thank you for watching. Leave the video a like, and if you want to stay up to date on future uploads, hit the subscribe button and bell icon. You can also see videos early, uncut, and ad-free by joining me on Patreon. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank all of my patrons and members with an ultra thanks to Ian Feebig, Eamon Kelly, Michael Hardy, Ian Hodge, County Ark, Mike Halsey, Retro PC Gamer, Benjamin Stokes, Movie Magic, Charles Borsam, Olivia Computer, Bano, Extreme Streamers, Tom, Dusk, Colin Camille, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Ed Mark Starr, Dylan Thomas, Lilac Yane, Howard Craig Kervik, and Caging G. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, have a good one.